Good evening, and welcome to the Healthy Heart Nation's Juneteenth program. We are going to talk a little bit today, and I am not your host, Danette Batiste. She's going to be joining us shortly. My name is Brian Hardy. I'm a director with the Healthy Heart Nation, and I'm also the Business Ambassador Chair. So today we wanted to talk to you a little bit about Juneteenth and the business impact then and now. We have a couple of slides that we wanted to show you, and let's go ahead and get right into it. So on September 22nd, 1862, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, which declared that as of January 1st, 1863, all enslaved people in the United States currently engaged in rebellion against the Union shall be thenceforward and forever free. Lincoln, I would like to point out, didn't actually free all of the approximately 4 million women and children held in slavery in the United States when he signed the formal Emancipation Proclamation the following January. The document applied only to enslaved people in the Confederacy and not to those in the border states that remained loyal to the Union. On Freedom's Eve, or the eve of January 1st, 1863, the very first watch night services took place. On that night, enslaved and free African Americans gathered in churches and in private homes all across the country, awaiting news that the Emancipation Proclamation had taken effect. At the stroke of midnight, prayers were answered as all enslaved people in the Confederate States were declared legally free. Union soldiers, many of whom were Black, marched into plantations and across the cities in the South, reading small copies of the Emancipation Proclamation, spreading the news of the freedom in the Confederate States. However, only through the 13th Amendment, which passed in December of 1865, did slavery actually end throughout the United States. And some argue still today. Not everyone in the Confederate territory would immediately be free, though. Even though the Emancipation Proclamation was made effective in 1863, it could not be implemented in places still under Confederate control. As a result, in the westernmost Confederate state of Texas, enslaved people would not be free until much later. Freedom finally came on June 19th, 1865, when some 2,000 Union troops arrived in Galveston Bay, Texas. The Army announced that the more than 250,000 enslaved Black people in the state were free by executive decree. This day came to be known as Juneteenth by the newly freed people in Texas as they broke out in a celebration of their freedom, complete with music, food, dancing, and religious worship. The following year, on June 19th, the first official Juneteenth celebration took place in Texas. The original observances included prayer meetings and the singing of spirituals, and celebrants wore new clothes as a way of representing their newfound freedom. Within a few years, African Americans in other states were celebrating the day as well, making it an annual tradition. Celebrations have continued across the United States into the 21st century and typically include prayer and religious services, speeches, educational events, family gatherings, and picnics and festivals with music, food, and dancing. Juneteenth became a state holiday in Texas in 1980, and a number of other states subsequently followed suit. In 2021, Juneteenth was made a federal holiday. The day is also celebrated outside of the United States, being used by organizations in a number of countries to recognize the end of slavery and to honor the culture and achievement of African Americans. I would like to now bring up our panel, and I'm going to just go ahead and bring them both up at the same time. Hi, good evening. How are you doing? Let's start with Heather. Heather, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Heather Willis, and I am a psychotherapist from Michigan. I've been in the field, behavioral health and justice fields, for about 20 years. I am currently involved with justice initiatives in the state of Michigan, and I own a private practice here for psychotherapy in Michigan.
All right, thank you, Heather. Sue, what about you?
Hi, my name is Sue McCormick, and I'm a regional vice president for a hotel management company. I've been in this industry for, I'm not going to say how long, but a while. And I also have a nonprofit where I help to mentor youth who are aging out of foster care. So that's something that's near and dear to my heart.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for being part of this this important discussion, and we definitely appreciate it. And also thank you both for being ambassadors for the Healthy Heart Nation. That's a good organization there. All right, let's go ahead and jump into this. So when we hear about Juneteenth, the obvious transition is, okay, you were once enslaved, now you're free, but then what is it that you actually do? So I want to kind of try to use, the many years since experience that we have in studying like behavior and business and all that to try to maybe put ourselves a little bit in the mindset of what they would have to go through on day one. So, the first and most obvious thing is, okay, yay, I'm free. What does that mean? So I have a family. Does that mean I have to leave my my current dwellings and go somewhere else? Where else do I go? So let's kind of start the conversation around there. And I think, Heather, I want to kick it off to you because you're in psychology. And so let's jump into the minds and try to see kind of what transition they first needed to make.
Mm-hmm. I first want to address the term free. There's a difference between being free and not being a slave. So they were released from slavery and they woke up one day and it's still like, the question is, how far are we to freedom? We could ask ourselves that even now, how far are we to freedom? The reality is, before Juneteenth, the slaves had been freed by President Lincoln, but these particular slaves in Texas did not know that they were free because nobody told them that they were free, right? And I think we're seeing a lot of that today. So going back to this family that you're talking about, once they had this big celebration and everybody is rushing to Texas and they're like, yo, you're free now, go and live your life. And they're like, what do we do? They had experienced such significant trauma. And I'm a trauma-informed therapist. Back then, they didn't have trauma-informed therapists. They weren't giving them resources. And an interesting fact is that even now, the evidence-based trauma-informed therapy that we have that's actually being used, it's evidence-based, still does not work effectively for young African-American youth. Because the evidence-based studies that they have done to verify this and make sure it works wasn't done on our people. So it doesn't work for us. They're using different criteria that we cannot relate to. So even now we're experiencing trauma that is not being addressed in the way that it could. So back to this family, right? They have been informed that they are free, but how are they to support themselves? Where do they go? You know, there's something called a trauma bond, and that's where a person becomes attached to their abuser because of the cycle of shared abuse and the experiences that keep bringing them back together in this trauma. And sometimes you even find them sympathizing with the abuser. And I'm sure that that was very likely the case. So it's like, well, how can I leave? They need me. What are they going to do if I leave? You know, besides the fact that they didn't have anywhere to go. I can't even imagine how that would have affected them. And yet they picked up and kept pushing in the best way through Jim Crow, through sharecropping, you know, and other things that were put in place to hold them back. And even mentioning that back to the thought of freedom, you know, when did Jim Crow end? 50, 60 years ago?
Because isn't it also true that a number of slaves didn't leave?
Yeah.
They continued to stay there on those plantations and work because it was a quote unquote safer space. You know, it was what they knew. And we all know that some people don't even like change. So we have this.
Well, I mean, I kind of envision it like, okay, well, if you know you're free today, you have a family, you want to, let's say you want to go to Dallas or you want to go way north to New York or something like that. You know, it's not like slaves were paid money and they could cash out their vacation, holiday, sick time, and then buy a bus ticket or a plane ticket or something like that to go to New York. So, you know, when that opportunity came up to go, I would imagine a lot were hesitant. And, you know, I'm sure from a business standpoint, the plantation owners probably offered an option. Hey, you know, I don't have any money, as you know, because I'm hiring you for free. How about you stay here and I'll pay you the least amount of money possible? And then in that mindset, you're like, well, that may not be a bad idea because then I can now build up some money to be able to then leave. Before we get into that, because I want to talk a little bit about the business of this, and we'll bring in Danette here, but I want to talk a little bit about the business of this because you know, it took a couple of years for them to realize that they were no longer enslaved. And there's several theories around this, right? There's one where soldiers were sent down to let them know, and those soldiers were murdered, and so the word never got to them. So that's one theory. And probably all of these things happened because at the time it was kind of everything was controlled by press that didn't look like us. So. And of course, you can't go back to the history books and kind of read that because they kind of just excluded them. Another theory was 100% profit based. And Sue, I know you run business. You need profit coming into the bottom line. These plantation owners were getting a little bit greedy there, and there's talk of collusion with the federal government to let them work at least one more season. Right. And then there's talk of not colluding with the federal government, but actually making them work one more season to drive kind of to that extra bottom line. And you know, all of these theories just, yes, we're free, but it kind of still puts us in a horrible place to what do I do now? Oh, one more theory that was discussed was there were riots at the time because, you know, there were rumors and rumblings of free people, and the slaves were like, well, we should have this here, and they started turning on their white owners. And so what one of the theories is to offer payback. They were saying, okay, we're just not going to tell them that they're free, because if we tell them, they're all going to come and take us and take all of our stuff.
Yeah. It's I was reading something, and it said that slavery was the economic engine, right? That fueled the growth
Mm.
of not only the United States but many countries. And it's interesting because I was at lunch. I was at work, and I was at lunch, and one of the women at our table was talking about her wealthy grandfather in Charleston,
Hmm.
and how the family money, I forget exactly how she said it. She didn't know she didn't know how this was impacting me, but she said that the family's wealth was derived from rice, a rice plantation or something like that.
Hmm.
And of course, my mind went directly to, well, my ancestors contributed to your family's wealth, right?
Right.
That's where it started. And so, yeah, when you start to talk about the economic impact of slavery, um, it's so deeply rooted, and you can go so many different ways with it, um, that I don't know. It's one of the things that makes my blood boil, to be honest. To
Yeah.
be honest, to hear something like that, where someone says, "Oh yeah, my rich grandfather and our family wealth comes from rice.
Right.
We had a rice plantation, and that started with us."
Right. And so, Heather, from a psychological standpoint, as it relates to even with the slaves, like, I mean, not having that acknowledgement of the contribution, and for them to, essentially try to look at it as separating out, like the differences, or that they're not related. How does that affect the Black mentality when it comes to slavery and the whole freedom from slavery kind of situation?
Okay, so I said earlier, we use the term freedom loosely because if we're talking about economic driving forces in slavery, we still see a lot of that today. And if we talk about how that affects Black people then and now, there's something called vicarious trauma, and that's where you see something happen, you empathize with it, and then the more you see it, the more it affects you. In many cases, your brain cannot distinguish between the trauma that happened to someone else and that's happening to you. Now, with that, here, we're still living this trauma. We're still experiencing, and I mean, you talk about Black Lives Matter, you talk about mass incarceration, we're still being traumatized. Um, Economic reasons why we are enslaved. I think about the school to prison pipeline.
Mm.
Starts in the third grade. And if you look at how our young people, so I live in the Metro Detroit area, and we look at our third graders and whether or not they can read, and based on their scores, they're building prisons, right? So economic benefit for some of them and not us, right? So it costs about $36,000 to house someone in our jails here for a year. There are other programs that they can be involved in that cost as little as like $5,000 a year. When people are discharged from the jail after, and I mean, I could build up to how they are pulling these young people from a very early age, because they look at our young men and they're automatically viewed as being less innocent and older. You be a 9-year-old and you put them in a lineup with a bunch of other 9-year-olds from other races, and they're automatically pulled out and singled out as being older and less innocent. How do you think that affects them? If they're growing up and they know that they got suspended from school, and Daquan got suspended from school, and Jay Sean got suspended from school, but Bobby has never been suspended from school. Statistically, Black young men are the number one group of children in elementary school to be suspended, followed by Hispanic men and then Black females. And this is elementary school.
Wow.
It starts really early. So how do you develop a sense of pride and confidence? How do you feel free when you can't move? You can't move. And just as an aside, for the jails, it costs $35,000 to house them for a year. They charge them for their housing when they're discharged, right? They send them a bill, like it's a hotel, Sue. They're sending them a bill, right?
What? And then they get free labor while they're in there, right?
Exactly. And their meals, at least in the Oakland County Jail where I live, their meals cost 18 cents to make. 18 cents per meal. Where's that money going?
Okay. I'm trying to unwrap this here because clearly we're still not free. When they get the bill, so I get released from prison, you're saying I get an invoice from the prison of this is how much it cost and you have to pay it. So what recourse is there? Like, did I sign a contract before I went to jail? Was it in my plea bargain that I signed that I may not have understood?
Well, in some cases with that plea bargain, if you're signing this plea and admitting to something, then you're gonna have the jail time. I don't know that it's in the write-up. I don't know, but I do know that there are people who, if they can afford an attorney, can get that revoked and they don't have to pay. But for the ones who do have to pay, it goes towards their fines and costs, and they cannot get off of probation until those fines and costs are paid off, right?
Wow.
So if you're on probation until you pay off your fines and costs and something else happens, it's just a never-ending cycle.
Wow.
You can never escape it.
I had no idea.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're free, quote unquote, but we're still kind of enslaved to the system.
Mm-hmm.
And even when you start looking at Juneteenth being a holiday, I think it was something like what was it? Like it wasn't a unanimous decision in Congress for Juneteenth to be a holiday. I believe if I remember correctly, it was like 14 people voted against it or did not vote to approve. I don't know, however you want to spin that, but 14 people did not say yes, that this should be a holiday out of 150 or so. And if I also remember correctly, I believe Texas and Alabama, at least two House representatives from each of those voted against it. And it kind of makes me think politicians are a little bit more serving the interest of the people that hired them. So look at it like a person you hire, and you hire this person, there's a sense of somewhat of some loyalty to do the things that I want done.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when I go back to like Juneteenth and why the slaves weren't told that they were free. And if there was collusion with the government might have been like, hey, the actual representatives for that particular area were told, hey, we voted you into office. You're going to have to do something to delay this message coming back. Because I'm sure the representatives went through Galveston. It's a pretty big city. Sure, there was an office there, Yeah, maybe they didn't have supersonic aircrafts or something, but I'm sure somebody came back in those 2 years that had some information. So, yeah, it's Sue, as you mentioned, it just makes you mad, kind of the more and more that you think about it.
Well, it's like the legacy. It's like the legacy of slavery is ever present.
Mm-hmm.
What Heather shared about the prison system, I had no idea that people got a bill when they leave prison, but also the free labor. You can call it free labor, but that's, in my eyes, the same as slavery. It's
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's what's happening when you're in prison.
Yeah, and when the slaves were freed, then folks had to figure out how to get free labor still. So then they started actually imprisoning them, putting them in these labor camps to build infrastructure projects. So yeah, I'm gonna put you in a dorm in a nice hotel that you can never leave from, and here you have to produce X until I say that you were free. And then it actually was because the actual political system and society at that time hadn't changed. Then you had people that were kind of just imprisoning Black people off of hearsay, if you will. Or this person said somebody committed a crime against me, and then now these 4 people go to jail to work in a prison camp to build the railroad for the people that accused them. So.
Yeah, and we also want to make note of just the terminology of slavery, and I know that a lot of people, and I am one of those people who agree that it's really like being called slaved is really not accurate in terms of how it represents our people. It's more about that we were enslaved, not slaves. And so Nicole Hardy actually sent over a statement that states that enslaved stresses the humanity of the individual being taken by another, whereas slave denotes that a person at their core is not human or they are less than. So we want to really focus the conversation and make sure that it sounds almost like we're victims of, but the truth is we were enslaved, we were never slaves. Right. So I want to make sure that we make that denote.
That's a great point, and it's actually something that we use in the mental health field. You are not your circumstance.
Right.
Yep. So that's a great point.
Okay, so
sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I mean, I know that there were some questions around the education system, like back then and now, right? So drawing those conclusions, or at least those similarities. Back then, before Juneteenth happened, there was a whole movement toward keeping true information from the people who needed it, right? So we were trying to keep the people from knowing that they were freed. These enslaved people were freed, right? And so we have a whole push now to ensure that a whole group of the population isn't necessarily informed about the true education of what happened to a group of people, back in those times. How do you all feel that affects, all races as it relates to how this information is being handled? And I'll start with you, Sue. Or if you want to take a breath, I can start with Heather. Okay, so I'll start with you, Heather, on that one.
Okay. I first recognized that critical race theory was important before I even knew what the name was.
Right.
I was in an internship for my graduate school program, and was talking about Frederick Douglass with some of my coworkers, and who did not look like me.
Okay.
And the question was posed like, who's Frederick Douglass? I was like, wait a minute.
Right.
Okay, we don't know who Frederick Douglass is.
Right.
That was the first sign that I got that we were in trouble. Critical race theory is an opportunity, the educating of our students, let me put it this way, the educating of our students of the true history of our country is super important for everyone, because what you don't know can hurt you. When you think about implicit bias and recognizing that we have biases against ourselves, against our people, right? And we don't even realize it. I'm going to throw this out there. Harvard has an implicit bias test that you can go on their website. If you just Google like Harvard implicit bias and take that test, they have it for so many different, I think it's like race, LGBTQ, sex, whatever. Take the race one. You might be surprised of your own biases.
Right.
But if we are not educated about our history and even our accomplishments, the places where we have been victimized, but also the many great things that we have been able to achieve as
Yes.
a people, then we don't know, and we cannot build pride in our
Yes.
community. We do not learn to trust each other. We
Right.
don't have a community because we don't know that we belong to each other.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
you ask your average Black person, your Black American descendant of an enslaved person,
Mm-hmm.
what their culture is. They don't have one.
Right.
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 And why is that? You know, and they make these things laughable. Even like Brian, what you were saying earlier about people not voting for Juneteenth. I was talking to a young client earlier today, and she's largely disconnected with
Mm-hmm.
Juneteenth, and she's
Yeah.
a professional, master's level engineer, you know, doing big things, right? High achiever, and she's like, "Yeah, I'm going to celebrate the 4th of July. I don't really get Juneteenth," because she doesn't know. There's
Right.
no significance
Right.
to her.
Yeah.
Making it laughable. I don't know if you guys heard about the and then I'm going to stop so Sue can get her time. The Walmart Juneteenth ice cream and the Children's Museum that had the Juneteenth watermelon fruit salad.
I heard
It's
about that.
laughable. It's
Yeah.
laughable. You know, there's who wants to connect with that? They're making it like a joke, like we'll throw this to them, and then not giving. I have the day off because I work for a wonderful agency, but a
Right.
lot of people still don't even have the day off. So, like, what is it? What's the purpose?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm just going to give an example of a conversation I had with someone who was the president of the company I was working for at the time.
Okay.
And sometimes, as most of us know, if you're the only Black person in the space, people want to have discussions around race with you.
Mm. You become the expert.
You become the expert.
Mhm.
And sometimes they're only Black friend.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
we were at lunch and there was a few of us at the table and he started to talk about race. I don't remember how it all came up, but he said he'd had a dinner party. Oh, because it was around the time that the people were killed, the massacre at the Black church in
Charlotte?
Charlotte.
Yeah.
Was it Charlotte?
I think
It
so.
was Charlotte.
Mhm.
So it's around that time, and there was a lot of talk about the Confederate flag, and we were taking the Confederate flag down. And so he said he'd had a dinner party, and that some of his Southern friends at the dinner party, because he was from the Northeast, they were just talking about how the Confederate flag was something that they were proud of because their ancestors or relatives fought in the war and it gave them pride that, all this stuff. And then he said, and I'm just listening because sometimes I don't want to participate. But then he said, and my friends at the dinner party were saying, really, it wasn't about Black people at all. They just were protecting their assets. They just wanted to protect their property. And I said, exactly, because I would have been their property.
Exactly. Right.
And it was like a light bulb went off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He was thinking property as, the cattle, the ranch, the land.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't thinking about the human property that they had also.
Right.
That's why things like critical race theory are so important.
Right.
Man was 20-something years old and he hadn't allowed himself to even think in terms of also the people who were property on those plantations.
Right. And I have to confess that, like, in terms of, like, I wasn't aware fully of Juneteenth, probably within like 5 to 7 years, like I have to be honest about it. I was not aware of what it was and what it was all about. And so I just recently came into an awareness of it. But even on the same token of, like, with the critical race theory, like, you've had the situation where something that happened and someone tells you that it didn't, right? So it's almost like from a psychological standpoint, you start to question yourself. Like, I know this happened. Like when someone lies on you, it's almost like our race has been lied on. It's been misrepresented, and we're not supposed to try to get that clarified. We're not supposed to try to bring that truth out. By us trying to correct the error and bring out the truth, we're wrong for doing it. And so, it just seems like there's just an ever-present cycle that, like in terms of victim blaming, or to a certain extent, or, it all kind of falls on us, our shoulders, to try to fix it and make it right, and to do all of these things to represent in the face of resistance when we know that it's true. So, that does become challenging at times.
Right. Yeah. So I think that, it's a cycle of challenging times. So the same family that we were kind of talking about in hypotheticals, maybe they scrape up enough money, they move to Tulsa, and they work for some years. No white business wants to give them any space in their store to come in and do anything, so they go and build their own communities, build their own theaters, and all of this, build a whole economic system, and then it gets destroyed. And it's like a continuous, the Black Wall Street and that whole society, it just gets demolished. People just do everything they can't even figure out how many people died, because they don't want to keep records of how many people they killed. So, and it's just like a continuous thing. So you build all this up, you become freed, you have no money, yet you leave and you transplant into a different location. Maybe you find some land, maybe you find it where it was a horrible deal, but you were still able to grow crops and get out of the horrible deal. Kind of just with any business that you go through now, maybe you have a bad investment and you got to figure out how to get out of it and get into something, a better debt facility. And they're able to do this, and then as soon as they're seen as successful, bam, they just get hit and knocked back down again. And it does seem like a cycle, that we go through. And, as a race, we seem quite resilient, because we can talk about all of these things that no one else really has been through, and we're able to kind of overcome. We were able to get out of it. But it's just, when are the other folks going to realize it? And I don't think they're going to realize it until the education of actual American history occurs. Right. And actual American history isn't like, John Smith came over on the Mayflower, and he discovered America. He told the tribe of Indians that he was looking at, he said, "Hey, I discovered America," and no one thinks twice about it. But in reality, you can't discover something that people lived at. So, right. It's a whole system of just change that has to occur. And we called it something other than critical race theory, but that's essentially what it was: understanding other cultures and the other cultures' history. And America is a melting pot of all of these different histories of many people, enslaved folks as well as other folks that kind of needs to get told to be able to understand where we came from, so we can get to that next level.
Right. And it is about the resilience, right? Like, it's not just, that we were enslaved and we were enslaved people, but it is about the fact that we were able to turn it around, to still succeed, to still thrive, to still be here physically, just to be present is something that is worth celebrating. So what are your thoughts? And I'll ask both, Heather and Sue and Brian, in terms of what are your thoughts on how does the celebration of Juneteenth, in your opinion, benefit our community? And Brian, I'll start with you.
How it benefits our community, I would say a couple of different aspects, but two to start with. First of all, it's a matter of pride. So what we're celebrating our independence from something. So everybody can relate to this. We're coming up on July 4th. In fact, I think the 14 people that voted against this were talking about, hey, we don't like the name independence. We would have been okay if it was named something other than independence. But I digress for a minute. But anyway, if we can kind of take that and use Juneteenth to educate our communities on what it really is, what we had to go through, how we were able to overcome it, how do we prevent things from happening in the future, and how do we kind of remain this resilient society.
Right.
Well, I'll just start with that.
All right. And so, Sue, how do you feel that Juneteenth benefits businesses? Celebration of Juneteenth benefits businesses?
Well, I think that, as Brian said, it's a time of celebration, of remembrance, of reflection. And I know that for myself, we start to talk about it, and I myself always, it's a week where I buy from Black businesses. I consciously buy from Black businesses. Not that I don't throughout the year, but this particular week leading up to Juneteenth, I consciously support Black businesses. So, I think that that's something that we can do as part of the process. It's not only a celebration, but how do we really support each other?
That's great.
So that's just something that I do.
That's fantastic. Okay. And so, Heather, how do you feel that Juneteenth benefits, the celebration of Juneteenth can benefit the mental health of the Black community?
I want to say again that it can be a really amazing source of pride, because we finally have something. We have something. We have something for Black Americans, other than something that's going to clog our arteries and you know what I'm saying? So if we take the opportunity and use it for starting with our children, I think it's really important to kind of pull them in now and say, hey, you guys, this is what this is, and this is what this means for us. Like, we are not chattel, because we're in the history books, but in the history books as not even as enslaved people, but as slaves.
Wow.
Say, nope, we weren't slaves. We were stolen. We were mistreated and abused. But guess what? Look how strong we are, because we've overcome all of this.
We're still here.
Yes. Right. Beautiful. Right. Smart, creative, innovative.
Right.
That's who we are. I think it would be great to have that opportunity to bring it, like there's still some schools in session here. If they could acknowledge it during the school session, parents can say, hey guys, let's make some hibiscus punch. Why are we making hibiscus punch? Because it's way less racist than a watermelon fruit salad. But it represents these things, and it gives us something to hold on to and say, okay, we do belong.
Absolutely.
We do have a place and we have a story.
Absolutely. And I love everything that you guys said in terms of just being really intentional, in terms of educating, in terms of sharing, in terms of speaking it into existence and the truth, and sharing it with our children and having them take the time to really acknowledge it is really important. As well as, supporting Black businesses and giving them an opportunity to shine, even more so during that time period, highlighting them and bringing them out, as well as, everything that you said, Brian, is really important, and we have to make sure that we continue this as the years go by. So this tradition is deeply rooted into something that is repeatable, and that is something that can be done on a consistent basis. It looks like you're going to say something, Brian. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, so I was just going to say, like, and Danette, this because we worked pretty closely with this person. We used to work at a Black minority woman-owned company, and great leader and innovator and every good thing you could possibly say. And one of the things that she taught us a lot was about making sure, like, whenever you get to somewhere, you help somebody else up, and it's a sense of community. So, like, in the business arena, what we try to do is say, okay, use government as an example. They have this big pie of money, and they take 10% out or so, and they say, okay, we'll take this 10% and we'll divide it amongst every minority and service disabled veterans, but it's only that 10%. And by the way, that 10%, you need to prove that you're a Black person or a minority business or whatever. And as such, it's, again, the shaping of our outcome. Why isn't it the whole pie? Why don't we have access to the whole pie? Why is it that they're just taking this small spin and then dividing it amongst us? And maybe one of the things we can do for Juneteenth of next year is try to figure out how to kind of get the government into a different position where they're expanding that pie or making the requirements a little bit different. I think that the celebration of Juneteenth, we should kind of try to focus on stuff like that. Try to focus on how we can get Black folks more business. I mean, it's great that we're going out and spending money with Black folks. We have to change. We have to do a systemic change in our government, in our business practices. Like this, we constantly would get people saying, "Hey, I don't know any minority businesses." We're like, we can name 650. Which one do you want to choose from? And so we have to figure out how to reshape that whole mindset. And I know I've said a lot, kind of gone off topic there for a little bit.
No, it is the topic. It is the topic. It's not about the past and today. It's about what do we need to do to sustain the future, right? So that is the topic.
So yeah, and I think that so even with Tulsa and how we were kind of once again knocked down, we were able to get back up. One other point I kind of wanted to make kind of right after that is I just recently watched the Magic Johnson documentary on Apple TV, which I thought was pretty neat. And in it, he was talking about how in Michigan, where Heather lives there, by the way, Oakland, isn't that the wealthiest county in the?
Yes.
And they're charging people.
Oakland County is the largest and wealthiest in the state of Michigan. Okay,
so we'll come back to that for a minute. But so Magic Johnson, he was like looking at this high school. I want to play basketball there. It's kind of the pinnacle of where he wanted to be as an athlete. And then busing comes along, and he and his brother gets bused across town, across Lansing, to a completely different community where he stood out a little bit more. And, like his ability to rise above the circumstance that he was put in and become kind of who he is today, like with all of his business ventures, he's not looked at as just a basketball player anymore, but he was able to overcome all that kind of despite, again, if you really think about it, being knocked down again, right? Because he could have taken a different path. He could have let that kind of dissuade him from his goals and his aspirations. But he was able to kind of, the situation is what it is, and he's kind of representative of one of those people that just said, okay, I have nothing. I'm starting from scratch, but you know what? I'm still going to beat all of you all. And he was able to do it. So I don't know. I just wanted to bring that up as a kind of a good point about just continuous just being knocked down and being able to overcome that again.
Right. So we have a little more than 12 minutes left. I don't know if anyone had any closing statements that we could make, but I wanted to first acknowledge Marvin Barge, who was the person who helped write the introduction that Brian shared with us earlier. So I wanted to acknowledge him. Okay, so
I want to throw out that Oakland County is not the largest, it's the second largest, but we are the wealthiest.
Okay, so you're the wealthiest and you charge people when they leave
prison. Okay.
That's probably part of the reason why we're
part of the wealth.
Now, is that actual liquidity? Is that cash, or it's just in the debt that you're sending out to people that you can't collect from?
Listen, I've seen people stand in line to pay that they have at the courthouse.
Okay.
Yeah. No,
So
seriously.
they're getting some of it back.
Right.
Fines and costs. Fines and costs.
But yes, in your closing statement, Heather, for Juneteenth, like, what do you want people to remember the most as it relates to this conversation?
Okay. Compassion. Be compassionate. I think that there is a total onslaught on our community as people of color as a whole, and especially people who are descendants of enslaved people in America.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a goal to separate us and have us judge each other and not trust each other. And, therefore, we're not really able to build together.
Right.
The four of us are here really speaking from a position of privilege,
Mm-hmm.
and I would like to, I guess, challenge us, myself included, and those who might see this, to really think about that and what we could do. And instead of judging, say, how can I help? Because we aren't experiencing the effects in all of the effects in the ways that other people are. I think we all are experiencing effects, but maybe not to the same intensity. And we can talk about it all day, but it's super important to push past these platitudes and these ideas and really become more intentional in how we cherish each other, how we acknowledge that people have experienced trauma, this vicarious generational trauma, and sometimes direct trauma, right? And provide opportunities and encourage each other and lead from a place of compassion and an openness, willing to challenge our own biases and educate others so that we can take this Juneteenth initiative and bring it into our community and build on it.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Heather. Appreciate that. Sue?
Well, I want to start by reading a quote that I wrote down. And it stuck with me today. It says, "Our democracy's founding ideals were false when they were written.
Mm.
Black Americans have fought to make them true."
Mm.
And that is from Nicole Hannah Jones, the creator of the 1619 Project.
Yes.
And it resonated with me. And I think my parting thought would be just to continue to fight for our seat at the table.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've all touched on it in one way or another, but whether it's supporting each other, helping to educate people, taking time to empathize, taking time to mentor, whatever that means. But I think that we are resilient and we just need to continue that fight.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sue. Brian?
Wow, let's see. I've said a lot. I've used up all my words. I would say, so again, I'll just reiterate a couple of things. One is, you can't sit back and watch a change happen. You have to be the change and make the change happen. So that means like get involved, just get involved. So I have a picture right behind me. You probably can't see it that well, but it was a Obama picture of one of his staff members' sons coming in, and the son said, I think his name was Jacob, and his son said, like Obama tells a story of there was two kids. One kid is asking him all kind of military secrets questions and whatever. But the younger kid was all he wanted to do was see, like, is this hair real? Like, are you like me?
Mm-hmm.
He up and he touches his head, and Pete Souza, the photographer, takes a picture and he says, yeah, I think I embodied that moment basically. But the bigger realm of things, and you really should look this up. There's a video that was released, I believe it was a week ago, on Obama.org of the history of that picture. I've had that picture for some years, but that little boy just graduating from high school in his dad works for the State Department, so he's in Africa, and he graduated from high school, and like ultimately it showed we can rise up to this level. I asked my kids, just a couple of presidents, which one of them would let him touch his hair. And so would it be, the one after Obama or Obama? And they felt that obviously Obama, they couldn't articulate it, maybe necessarily, at least the younger one couldn't articulate it, but he had a sense of, this is a person like me. He feels like me. I can relate to this person. If there's two people in a room, I can go up and I can talk to this person. And ultimately, that means we have to rise into those kind of positions to show that next generation that you can do it. And so I would empower everybody to go be the change, make the change, go vote, put the people in office that are going to serve your interest, not people that are office that are serving interests outside of yours. The ones that want to vote for Juneteenth, the ones that want to make sure that we're getting a better opportunity to compete at contracts and those kind of things. Give us access. We're good, if not better, and most of the time better than whoever else we're competing against. So, go and make that change. Put those people in office that need to be in office to serve our interests, and maybe use Juneteenth as a way to strategize to figure out how to do that. Danette, our previous boss would have had us working on Juneteenth because that's no one else is, and we would have to get many contracts as a result of it.
Absolutely. And thank you guys so much for joining this conversation. In terms of my summary of what Juneteenth is about, I definitely want to encourage everyone to go out and learn more about what Juneteenth was about. Do your own research, take that time and take this opportunity to celebrate the resilience that is the Black community, that is the people who were formerly enslaved, and look at how we can be better. We also want to take those opportunities, especially if you have the day off, to be of service to someone else. It is about service, and we advance in service. And so, we encourage you all to serve. So again, thank you so much for joining us. We invite you all to stay tuned for the third Friday of every month, Slave Food and Heart to Heart, Healthy Heart Nation. We are all about informing our community, celebrating our culture, and providing people with opportunities to do better, and to use the shoulders of the people that came before us so that we can elevate our future. So thank you for joining this conversation.
Thank you.